Hello, my name is Jessica Toren, and I'm the new Executive Director for the Paducah Area Chapter of the American Red Cross. We'd like to welcome you to our television show here today. Since we've just lived through a major flood here in the region, that's what we'll be discussing on our show today. We're going to discuss the recent flood and how you can become a volunteer with the American Red Cross and help others in our region who might need your help, or if you'd like to deploy nationally and help others across the country with Red Cross needs. Stay tuned to learn more here on the Paducah Chapter of the American Red Cross.
When a hurricane strikes, people will lose belongings, their homes, hope. They'll need your help. American Red Cross volunteers are ready to go to work. You can help. A click can feed and shelter a child for another day. A single text can provide a little comfort. Your call can make sure someone doesn't go hungry. Every single donation brings hope.
Hello and welcome back to the Paducah Area Chapter of the American Red Cross television show. We'd like to begin today with a little presentation about Flood 2011 here in the region. The flood began for the American Red Cross the day after Easter. This is when we first started to mobilize everybody. I'll begin with our first slide here. I chose this one because it says we are the calm after the storm, and that's exactly what we were for the Paducah community after this flood. We began, as I said, the day after Easter, become the calm after the storm for the flood victims in our area. What the Red Cross is based upon are 7 fundamental principles. These include humanity, impartiality, neutrality, independence, voluntary service, unity, and universality. While these may all be different words, they mean that we help everyone no matter what the situation, no matter what your income level, we will be there to help you. And this is the mentality that we took as we began to help our area residents after the flood. There are a couple statistics that I like to go over with people. The first is that we opened our shelter on April 25th at Margaret Hank Memorial Cumberland Presbyterian Church. Our shelter was open for 17 days after the flood. That's more than 2 weeks that people needed a place to stay after the flood. During this time, we averaged 25 clients per night. These were not all the same clients. Some families came and stayed the whole time. Some families came and left. We had a variety of people staying with us over those 17 days. If you average those numbers up, that's 482 shelter stays. That's a pretty phenomenal number for our area. This was a tri-county shelter, so we had residents from Ballard, McCracken, and Livingston counties who all stayed with us during the flood. While at the shelter, we served meals and snacks. One of the really big numbers I like to talk about is that we provided 1,927 meals during the flood. That's a pretty phenomenal number. That's almost 2,000 meals that were served. You did not have to be staying in the shelter to come in and get a hot meal. If you were a flood victim, you were welcome to come in and join us. The photo that you see here is our registration desk. Everyone is required to register when they come in. We do need to know who you are, how many children you have, some medical information so that we're able to help you to the best of our abilities. You'll see 2 of our volunteers there in their red vest. That's Cindy and Jerry there getting ready to work their shift, and that's Leon there in the middle. He worked lots of the night shifts for us and was a big help to the Red Cross. In the next slide, you will see the sleeping arrangements. I chose this photo because you'll notice that Red Cross provides cots for everybody that stays in our shelter. Cots or blankets are what we provide. We do not provide pillows. They're difficult to store and they have to be sanitized after every use. So typically Red Cross does not provide pillows for their shelter residents. In this case, we got a really interesting phone call from Kentucky Oaks Mall, and they said, we would like to help you. And I said, you know, we could really use some pillows and linens for our shelter residents. And they said, let me see what we can do. And a gentleman named J.J. Cafaro, who is with the Cafaro Company, gave me a call. And he said, I own a little store called Linens and More for Less, and I would like to help you all. And he provided for us 65 pillows and linens for everyone in the shelter, which was a phenomenal donation that we greatly appreciated. We were the only shelter in the area that had pillows and linens. This also meant that everyone who left our shelter got to go home with a new set of pillows and linens. So that was a real sense of pride for them to take that home with them. This photo is one of our favorites. This is a little 2-year-old girl who was staying in the shelter. She stayed with us the entire 17 days. It was her parents and her 4 siblings, and she actually turned 2 while she stayed in the shelter. So we threw a birthday party for her. Our group bought a cake and some presents, and everybody sang happy birthday to her, and she had a big time staying in the shelter. She enjoyed all the attention, and her family was very grateful that she was still able to celebrate her birthday and have a mini party with all of us who had gotten to know her so well. In addition to running the shelter, a lot of people may not realize that the Red Cross also helps first responders. These are people who are going out and actually doing the sandbagging. These might be firefighters or police officers who are responding to calls. We provide all of the food and water for those people. This includes, again, all 3 of our counties of Ballard, McCracken, and Livingston. So in addition to providing hot meals, we also provided snacks, bottled water, and Gatorade. We did this for the sandbaggers in all 3 counties. Also, you'll see there it says the EOCs. Those are the Emergency Operations Centers. This is where all of your local government and first responder officials are working out of. We provided the meals for those people as well. The first step that Red Cross does as we have our shelter open, we do what's called disaster assessment. And you'll see one of our vehicles there, that's an ERV, an ERV, it's an emergency response vehicle. It's kind of an ambulance looking vehicle and it can be used for disaster assessments. We can serve meals out of that. It's a really neat little vehicle that we had, and 4 of these were brought in from all over the country because we do not have one here in the Paducah area. So Red Cross mobilized their units and we brought in 4 to use during flood 2011. How they're used in disaster assessment is we have volunteers who are trained to drive these vehicles and fill out disaster assessment forms. We actually canvassed every single street, every single house, again in our 3-county area of Ballard, McCracken, and Livingston, and documented how much damage was done to those homes. That way, if someone needed assistance, we could look in our computer system instantly and see, yes, you were a flood victim, and here's how much assistance that you qualify for. Other agencies relied on us to provide this information, so we could verify that, yes, in fact, people were flood victims. Once disaster assessment was conducted and our shelter had closed down, it was time to begin cleanup. So we started our Stuff the Truck campaign, where we partnered with Paducah Power. Not only did we fill 1 truck, not 2 trucks, we filled 3 trucks with our Stuff the Truck campaign, all with donations from the community. We are so thankful that Paducah and McCracken County rallied together to fill 3 trucks with cleaning supplies. The way that this worked is the trucks were filled, everybody brought them in, and we had a pallet of bleach, we had a pallet of pine sol, a pallet of mops. We took them back to our distribution center and organized them into cleanup kits, put everything into a bucket so that the flood victims could just pick up 1 bucket and it had all their cleaning supplies in them. And then the very next week, that Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we distributed all of our cleanup kits. So in less than a week's time, we distributed 1,700 cleanup kits in 3 counties. That's a phenomenal number that Paducah and McCracken County, Ballard, and Livingston should be very, very proud of, that all volunteers were able to come together and distribute 1,700 cleanup kits. The really big number here is the one right below that. In addition to these cleanup kits, there were items that wouldn't fit in those buckets. Extra things of bleach, extra mops, extra brooms. 22,886 of those items were distributed in this community. 22,886 additional items besides the cleanup kits were distributed to flood victims across our area. That's a phenomenal number, and one that we as the Paducah area chapter should be very, very proud of, and very grateful to our community for helping us make that number. How did we get there? How did we get to that such a big number? We had donations from all over the community. Murray State came to town and had 3 Suburbans full. Petter Business, Petter Supply were donating some things to us. Paducah Bank came by. Lowe's hosted 2 Stuff the Herb events at their own location. While the flood was going on, the testing was going on in the high schools, and we had volunteers from Lone Oak High School. These students could have gone to the movies, and they chose to come and work the Stuff the Truck campaign instead, chose to volunteer their time. We had volunteers from BB&T, from Paducah Police, and of course Paducah Power came out and helped us make this event a huge success. How we distributed these. We partnered with Kentucky Farm Bureau at their locations in McCracken, Ballard, and Livingston counties and distributed them. People could come in, we verified with their address based on our disaster assessment that yes, they were a flood victim, and we passed out as many cleaning supplies as they needed. We had distribution points at Lowe's as well after working hours. People that worked during the day could come by in the evening at Lowe's. We also sent them to area churches in some of the hardest hit areas. People could go just to their churches and pick them up. And again, we put those cleaning kits in our ERVs, those emergency response vehicles, and took them directly to the people who couldn't make it back into town. Some general flood information. I think this is a really neat photo. If you all can see it, it shows just how high the water got on that flood wall. It comes up to our Welcome to Paducah, Kentucky sign on the flood wall. This was taken from a barge going across. From a Red Cross perspective, we had an average of 50 Red Cross volunteers working this disaster for a total of 40 days. That's a pretty phenomenal amount of volunteers, 50 volunteers a day for 40 days for working this disaster. The really neat number there is that 80% of these were Kentucky residents. That's high above the Red Cross average. So we're very, very thankful to all of our Kentucky residents who stepped up and were able to help us keep this a local level disaster. In addition to our Kentucky residents, Red Cross brings in volunteers from all over the country when something like this happens. And we'll talk to you a little bit about this later, how you can be involved in this process if you're interested. We had volunteers from Connecticut who helped with all of our client casework. We had a lady from Oregon who came in and helped run our shelter. We had people from Georgia, we had people from Florida, and these people like to volunteer. They like to help people after disasters, and they live to come out and help us. And we were very, very thankful to them for coming to our area during our time of need. In addition to the flood, while we were doing all of this, regular Red Cross work does not stop. We conducted 10 military calls. A lot of people don't realize that the Red Cross works very closely with the military. If there's been a birth or a death in the family and a soldier is deployed overseas, Red Cross gets that information to the deployed soldier. We had 10 of those calls during this time. We conducted 6 CPR classes. We held a safety day for over 100 area students, and we responded to an apartment fire affecting over 20 people. So in addition to the flood and the cleanup kits and running our shelter and doing disaster assessments, we also had our regular Red Cross work to be completed. I wanted to close by thanking just a few of our donors. I hope you all can see how many people were so helpful to us. BB&T is on there. They donated pallet after pallet of water to keep us going. Little Caesars fed our crew for several days. Walmart called and said, what can we do? And they sent over 3 truckloads of toys for our shelter, of Gatorade, of snacks. Kirchhoff's called us every day and said, do you want our soup? And leftover soup for the day was sent to our shelter. Whaler's Catch gave us their gumbo. Chick-fil-A provided sandwiches. James Enterprises provided a location for us. USEC gave us a financial donation. Atmos, JSA, Paducah Power, Paducah Water all contributed financially. Harrah's was a wonderful financial partner for us. There's some really important names on there, and I wanted to take this time to thank everyone. We only have 2 phone lines at our office, and we were just completely inundated with phone calls, people needing help. We put in a call to CSI, and they said, sure, we'll send over a 6-line phone system that you can use. Just phenomenal support from this Paducah, McCracken County, Ballard, and Livingston area. So we want to take this time to thank all of our donors who were a big support to us. I hope that tells you a little bit about the flood and the Red Cross response and how things work with us and what our process is. I'll be back with one of our lead volunteers, Kathie Hunt, and we'll be discussing how you can volunteer with us or how you can deploy nationally if you are interested. Thank you.
When every moment matters and a hand reaches out, when someone gives blood and a life is saved, that moment when heartbreak turns to hope, you're there. Through the American Red Cross. Every day, the Red Cross responds to nearly 200 neighborhood emergencies, and your support makes it possible. Use this moment to join us today. Support your local Red Cross.
Hello, and welcome back to the Paducah area chapter of the American Red Cross. My name is Jessica Toren, and I'm the executive director of the Paducah chapter. I have here with me Ms. Kathie Hunt. She's our disaster training coordinator, and she's going to talk with us a little bit about how we prepare for a flood or a major disaster, how our volunteers are trained, and how they can deploy across the country to help others as needed. So, Kathie, I just spoke a little bit about our flood and how we prepared here locally and all the volunteers that were needed. How else does the Red Cross help prepare for something like this? What do we do to get ready for it?
To get ready. Jessica, I think the most important thing that we do to get ready for a major disaster like the flood we had is our ongoing response to local disasters and the training that we do with our local volunteers just on a routine basis. We are always seeking local volunteers, and from that group of local volunteers we're able to identify people who can help in major disasters as well as everyday responses. We respond to about 1 local disaster a week, and most people don't really realize that, but we try to provide support to families who experience a family fire that burns up their home and their possessions, sometimes windstorms, tornadoes, any local disaster that affects one or a few families. And by our continuing involvement in those kinds of disasters, we are ready for major disasters like the flood that we had. In addition to the training we do for our local disasters and with our local volunteers, we do some ongoing training with our local volunteers that does prepare them for major disasters. For example, once a year we have what we call a shelter drill or a shelter exercise, and that involves training our local volunteers on how to be a part of a shelter operation. Then we go to one of our identified shelters in the community and we set it up. We set up not as big an operation as we had at Margaret Hank, but we still simulate that by setting up several cots, identifying where we're going to have our sleeping area, how we're going to feed our pretend clients, and then we usually have a little meal for ourselves, which is a good simulation for the kinds of practices that you need to make sure that you follow when you have a shelter feeding operation or any other kind of feeding operation. So our training is fairly comprehensive. We try to do a training or two every month. When we have a new volunteer, we try to get them integrated into the system.
What classes would a new volunteer take?
Yeah, our new volunteers would have an introductory class and an orientation to our local services. We do the shelter operations and the shelter simulations class, and then about once a year do the exercise that we were talking about. We try to teach as many of our local volunteers that are interested how to do what we call client casework, which is how to provide individual assistance to families. That's necessary assistance when they've had a single family fire or an apartment fire, but it also prepares them to work in a much larger disaster environment like we had during the flood. We periodically do have disaster assessment class to teach people how to evaluate whether homes are inhabitable or not, and that also, of course, prepares them for things like our flood event.
And what about those emergency response vehicles? Who might be interested in learning about those?
We have had some emergency response vehicle training here locally. Even though we don't have an IRV here ourselves, there is one in the region, and we've worked, and it's with the Callaway County chapter. It's a national vehicle, and we've worked in collaboration with them to provide training so that we have IRV drivers as well.
And defensive driving classes as well. There's a couple different options.
Yeah, we try to plug people into local defensive driving class, and then our Louisville regional chapter provides just a wide array of classes in Louisville that we're not able to provide because we either don't have the trained instructors or we don't have enough volume to justify the classes. Louisville area, the regional chapter in Louisville has a series. They publish a training calendar. We do that to a more limited degree. So some of our volunteers do try to combine maybe a little road trip up for some training. And all of our training is free, our disaster training. Our disaster volunteers are also offered first aid and CPR if they need it at a actually free of charge as well. There are some participation requirements before we can do that because, of course, health and safety classes do have a fee as a rule.
Well, and I talked a little bit about people from out of state coming in to help us during our flood. And I know in the past some of our local volunteers have gotten to go across the country and help with hurricanes, with floods, with windstorms, ice storms, whatever it may be.
Right.
If someone wants to do what we call a deployment, where they actually deploy outside of the chapter, what are some of the steps, some of the classes that they might need to do to be able to do that?
Well, most of the classes that people need to be eligible to be deployed are offered here locally. The classes that an individual would need is based on the area that they intend to work in. For example, sheltering versus client casework, or disaster assessment. There are specific training courses and other training requirements that have to be met, such as the defensive driving.
So you pick which one you're interested in.
Right.
And then we can kind of funnel you through.
And meet all of those basic requirements, most of which we can do right here locally.
And I think what some people may not realize also, they may think, oh, well, I don't know about client casework. You know, we had our Stuff the Truck campaign. We had people who drove the forklift, and all they did was inventory and count, but they really enjoyed that.
Exactly.
So there may be some other jobs.
There are lots of jobs. There's a job for everybody in the Red Cross.
And I know there's even one, it's our financial and statistical information. Like I said, we served 1,900 meals. Somebody accounted for all that.
Somebody had to sit down and figure that out.
So we even have a person, if you're interested, if you like numbers,
there are
you can
lots
count.
of different jobs in the Red Cross, and there's lots of opportunities to practice those skills locally, and then there's lots of opportunities to deploy. And what we ask our local volunteers who are interested in being deployed is that they actually work with a specialist who is a volunteer with our organization, our local organization, who is really kind of an expert on the requirements needed for deployment and how to utilize an online computer system to make sure that their availability is updated on a regular basis, and so that they're ready to be called through the national system. And what we would do is, if we have a local volunteer who's interested, then we link them up with the local volunteer at our chapter who's an expert at getting ready to be deployed.
And I would always say too, of course, during the flood was kind of a unique situation because only certain people were affected, not the whole area. So our volunteers were able to stay in hotels and have rental cars. But that might not always be the case.
No, it's not. And actually, we had a volunteer just recently who went to North Dakota to the flooding up there, and people who went to assist at in the floods in Minot, North Dakota, lived in a I believe it was kind of a barracks type. Yeah, it was a high school, and it was a high school with a gymnasium and a basement and no air conditioning. Of course, they don't use as much air conditioning in North Dakota because their summers are very short, but it got very hot this summer in North Dakota, and our local volunteer actually spent his nights working at the shelter.
Exactly.
Which is something he did, actually. He was experienced with that.
It is. It was Leon that you all saw in the photo earlier, and he worked the night shift for us, and he was actually able to deploy to North Dakota.
And work the night shift there.
And we have a pretty neat story about a lady that he met who was a former Red Crosser.
Right. In their shelter in North Dakota, there was I think she was 90-something. 90-something lady who was staying at the shelter. She had been a Red Cross volunteer for over 50 years, and she was able to take advantage of the Red Cross services. So I think they had a birthday party for her, didn't they?
She turned something in her 90s, and they had a party for her. And I thought, how neat that things come full circle. That she'd been there and had helped us out for over 50 years, and then her hometown
we were able
flooded.
to return the favor.
Return the favor. So you never quite know where you're going to see a Red Crosser.
That's true.
In action. So we've talked a little bit about if you want to deploy nationally, or if you want to be a volunteer. What sort of volunteers are we looking for here locally if you want to help with our local disaster response? What process do we use for that?
Okay. The primary job descriptions, for want of a better term, for our local volunteers is to work in preparing for and responding to local disasters. We have lots of opportunities actually to do preparedness education, and we don't really have any volunteers right now who are really terribly into doing preparedness education, but that's always a need that we have. We have what's called the DAT team, and we have a kind of a special training track that we follow with our DAT team members. DAT stands for Disaster Action Team, and this is it's a group of about 12 or 14 individuals who take turns being on call to respond to local disasters, to fires or windstorms or anything that would cause people to be out of their homes and need assistance with food, clothing, and shelter for a short period of time. They learn to do client casework. We make sure they know how to load and restock and utilize the supplies that are in our vans that we drive to local fires and other disasters. They of course have the orientation class, and we try to make their whole training program as user friendly for them, and their schedule to work as friendly as possible. For example, we have several people who work on our DAT team who work in the daytime, and we have organized our DAT team in such a way is that we really essentially have day call and night call, and the people that take the night call carry the DAT phone, but in the daytime they don't respond to those fires. Either the fire department or some other entity will contact us directly through the office, and the office can contact whoever is going to take day call, or the DAT, what we call the DAT phone, which is the emergency disaster number, local cell phone.
And these are volunteers who kind of know
Right.
a little bit about everything.
They
as opposed
do.
to if you want to deploy, you
Right.
really have to specialize.
You have to be you need to
you're
be a
local.
specialist to deploy, and you need specific training in a specific area or areas. But to be a DAT team, you need to be a generalist, and you need some experience under your belt, because some of the questions are not what you would expect.
Not what you would expect.
Right.
Exactly.
We do get some calls that will surprise us occasionally, but for the most part, our calls are genuine and they're people that need help. So it's a very rewarding thing to do, to serve on the DAT team. And then of course we have several support jobs that we need done by volunteers to keep our shelter kits organized and up to date, to do some training for other volunteers if you have a specialty in that area.
A little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything. Office work, that actually those folks that help answer the phones and make sure that the volunteers' records are in good shape are just,
We
you
have
know,
a little
they're
bit of everybody
invaluable.
that works for us here in
Right.
the office.
We
So
really do.
I want to thank Kathie Hunt for her time today and for all of her knowledge about disaster services, local and abroad, and how great she was. Thank you very much for joining us here at the Paducah area chapter of the American Red Cross. Hope you learned a little bit about Flood 2011, how the Red Cross process works, and we'd love for you to come out and stop by the office, give us a call if you're interested in volunteering and helping us out in any way. Again, my name is Jessica Toren, and thank you very much for all your help today. Thank you.